Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson, co-host with Gene Hislop. Our guest tonight is Al Robinson, or as people prefer to call him sometimes, Alfonso Robinson. And we're going to talk about local politics and some of the things that our mayor in Danbury, Mark Boughton, has accomplished or not accomplished over the years that may bode poorly for the state of Connecticut should he be elected lieutenant governor. Al, first of all, introduce yourself, give us a little background of who you are.
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll talk.
Well, thanks a lot for having me on the show again. I think this is my third appearance on your show. We talked the last time I was here. We talked about citizen journalism. A little background about myself: I've been in Danbury since 1987. Attended WestConn, and from there I dabbled in different branches of journalism. And because of the advent of the internet and because of blogging, I was able to bring my journalistic skills into the blogging arena. I started Hat City Blog back in July of 2005, and I've been covering Danbury politics ever since. So I've been trying to keep an eye on what's happening down at City Hall because my major concern was that as the years went by, especially after the term of Jean Iroquez, the coverage of local politics or stuff that happened down at City Hall decreased significantly in the newspapers. So we were unable to get the usual news about ad hoc committees, stuff that happened in planning or in zoning commissions, or stuff done at City Hall on a regular basis in the News Times.
What has happened to the News Times? What has caused them and their coverage to deteriorate over the years?
I think it's a number of factors. I think you could say maybe one, the fact that there aren't as many reporters as there were back during prior administrations. For instance, during the Jim Dyer administrations during the late 1980s, excuse me, they did extensive coverage on the whole Archetti fiasco. Yeah. They really, covered very well the falling apart of a sitting mayor. During the term of Jean Iroquez, I can definitely recall times where I can open up a paper and read about not only common council meetings, but even ad hoc committee meetings. You had somebody there who was a beat reporter whose responsibility was to just cover news at City Hall. Explain to the audience what a beat reporter is. Well, a beat reporter is basically, you have different genres of the newspaper. You have hard news, you have politics, you have sports, entertainment, and you have police and fire. You might have a beat reporter that might cover City Hall, which means that person's responsibility is primarily to cover anything that happens at City Hall. You might have a reporter who covers the police and fire beat, which means they'll cover anything that's related to police or fire, sports, and it goes down that route.
So are you saying there is no longer one reporter at the Danbury News Times, for instance, covering City Hall specifically?
In a nutshell, yes. You used to have like beat reporters whose responsibility, and again, you would go in there, you can pick up the paper, you can look through the archives, you can find ad hoc committees, planning commission, zoning commission. These people's responsibility was to stay in there every single day in City Hall and just find out what was going on and just report on that. You don't have that anymore. You'll be very, very, very lucky. Like, for instance, we have the Lee Farm thing that's happening right now. That's getting significant coverage because there's an uproar within the community about what's happening here. So they'll cover that. But there's a lot of other things that happen in planning and zoning that's not being covered that you don't normally hear, which you used to hear years prior.
No, I remember even last year talking, I believe there was some discrepancy with Jean Natalie, who is town clerk, right? And she was not reporting things on time. Is it possible that there's a collusion between why those things aren't showing up in the newspaper?
Well, I think
perhaps correlation might be a more appropriate word than
correlation.
Well, I think there's a little difference. I wouldn't necessarily that they're say that they're avoiding the covering of stuff like that. I would say that in prior administrations, when you had a beat reporter, the stuff that Natalie, the city clerk, did and is continuing to do, would be highly reported, and you would see that on probably the front page of the News-Times. I can tell you that something was done with a city clerk in Massachusetts, which is very similar to what the current city clerk is doing here in Danbury, in terms of the number of weddings that she does, that the city clerk did under the weekdays and most of the time under city time. That was reported in a 2-page article up in Massachusetts. They got no coverage here in Danbury whatsoever. But I would guarantee you, if it was in prior years when there was beat reporters or people covering City Hall more extensively, that would have been covered and it would have been picked up in the paper.
Referring more specifically, though, as far as posting town meetings in a timely manner to the newspaper, is it more that the newspaper isn't covering those things, or is it more that City Hall isn't, you know, reporting them in time? In other words, to get them published.
No, there's laws that require that you have to post a meeting 24 hours prior to the scheduling of an event, and it has to be posted in the paper with a similar circulation of the news. When you publish it, you have to publish it within a newspaper that has the circulation that is closest representative to the population of the city. We have several newspapers in Danbury, but the News-Times has the closest circulation to the population. So there hasn't really been an issue with publishing or posting stuff. In fact, there was probably one that I can recall a while back. But again, the biggest problem you have now is not the posting, it's actually reporters going down, spending the time to report on issues that are happening at City Hall. Again, people usually think about, when you think about City Hall, you think about the City Council or the Common Council meetings. You'd be amazed how little that really has to do with what's happening in Danbury, especially when it comes to issues such as overdevelopment and zoning laws and buildings that just pop up out of nowhere and condos. That comes down to your zoning commissions meetings, your planning commission meetings, ZBA meetings. Those are the really important meetings that you really want to keep an eye on. The city council or the common council meetings are usually just a dog and pony show. Those are already taken care of, and caucus meetings, all this stuff is all
everything's ironed out in advance, and it's just a formality of coming and voting on them.
It's a formality. You're just smiling for the cameras and just doing a lot of show.
Now, Gene's our resident expert on immigration. With the issues with Mayor Boughton and immigration and how those might play out on a statewide basis after the potential of an election of Tom Foley and Mark Boughton as governor and lieutenant governor, let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I guess the main issue in terms of immigration, I just want to bring it back a little bit to the News-Times and the current coverage that we have here, and bring it to a wider conversation on citizen journalism and the lack of quality reporting here in Danbury. Because in terms of immigration, it is my belief and the belief of many who have followed and listened, or in my case videotaped and documented the statements from this mayor over the years, that the public is not getting a true picture of this mayor when he speaks about stuff in regards to immigration, especially when he flip-flops or makes crazy statements or misleading statements, or just, in my opinion, flat-out lies.
Does he reach out to certain populations of immigrants to the exclusion of others, do you think?
Well, I'm not quite sure, but it's just, for me, again, that's not really my main concern. My main concern is strictly that the residents of the city of Danbury is not getting the true story about what's happening at City Hall and what's happening with the mayor and his administration and his Republican colleagues in regards to immigration, because the News-Times, in my opinion, is just not doing their adequate due diligence in covering what's happening here with a very sensitive topic that has, over the years, divided this community based upon ethnic lines, which is very unfortunate, because Danbury was a city built on the back of immigrants.
Absolutely, as is America.
Right.
Which, if I may, say, I've noticed that there's actually a lot more information, a lot more accurate information about what's really going on between the mayor and the immigrant community from the immigrant magazine specifically, and I will say not all of the immigrant newspapers and magazines in Danbury.
Yeah, like the ones that give campaign contributions to the mayor.
Yeah,
I
mean, that one, I won't name any names. But
You could.
certainly,
You could name names.
That's okay.
we will
Okay.
not. But like for instance, Comunidade News does great reporting about what's really going on at City Hall and with the immigrant community, and that is a Brazilian Portuguese newspaper. And El Canarita, a Spanish newspaper, has done some very good articles about what's going on between Boughton and the immigrant community, which are not picked up on by the newspaper,
Right.
Danbury News Times, I mean.
I guess those are great papers, and the problem with those papers is that, one, they have a very low circulation, and also, as you know, they're not written in English. So you have to take the time to either A, go online and translate this, or B, have a working knowledge of the language so that you can translate it accurately. Because you know, if you go into Google or some of those sites and just do a simple translation, it still doesn't come out properly because of the dialects between the languages.
But I've seen you over the years, if you don't mind me interrupting, speaking with the authors of these other, the reporters in these other newspapers, and kind of trying to get their take on what's going on or what they've learned, what they've gleaned, and at least you've taken a look at it and gotten some information. It would be very simple for the News Times to do the same, or to find a Spanish-speaking reporter to have on their staff at this point.
Well, as you know, there was a time, there was a period in time, I think during the early 2000s, like around 2005, 2006, where they actually had reporters from those various newspapers that you described doing articles and pieces for the News Times, and those individuals eventually left for reasons that I don't want to get into right now because I don't know all the details. I don't want to make any accusations.
But we might say it's mysteriously disappearing.
It is what it is, you know. But the fact remains is that you're just not getting an accurate depiction on what's happening in terms of immigration in Danbury from the mayor. Because the mayor can say one thing, and it's not picked up in this paper here in Danbury, but for some reason it's picked up in other papers. And it's amazing how you can learn more information. And for instance, the Danbury 11 case, in which we know very well that when the Danbury 11 case unfolded, the mayor stated on Channel 8, Channel 30, and he stated to the Hartford Courant that Danbury had played no role and knew nothing about this raid. We played no role whatsoever in the planning of this raid or whatever.
Yeah, as in fact, in retrospect, we know that they did.
We know we absolutely know. We absolutely now know that they did, and it was very involved. The mayor gave a deposition in the Danbury 11 case recently, a few months ago, and Dirk Parafort put out an article that was probably about, let's say, about 400 words in regards to what happened in the deposition. They actually obtained a copy of the deposition. It came out about 400 words on a deposition that the people in the Danbury have been waiting for a very long time, especially the people who felt that this whole entire raid was illegal and that the mayor and the city of Danbury overstepped their lines. We found out limited information in the News Times article, but Mary O'Leary from the New Haven Register writes an article based off the same deposition that's over 1,600 pages long, 1,600 words long. That gives much more detail into the mayor's deposition. We learned a lot more about what the mayor stated in the deposition that doesn't quite wash what he said in the past. You don't get that in the Danbury News Times article, but for some reason in New Haven, from a reporter that I've never seen here in Danbury, we get extensive information about the deposition, and not only that, we get quotes from attorneys that defended past mayors, such as Hugh Keese, who is a past attorney who defended James Dyer, who just came out and said, well, what the mayor's talking about doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You know, we get that type of information. We get information about ICE agents and police officers saying that, yes, Danbury pressured, great pressure was placed on from Danbury to ICE to do something about this. And it went up to the mayor's office. There's a lot of information that went on here in this deposition that we still don't even know about because we don't have a copy of the deposition, but I can tell you that this little flimsy article from the News Times doesn't even scratch the surface on what was going on.
So your feeling is that the News Times really glossed over a very important local issue?
I think it's probably the most important local issue in the mayor's tenure as mayor. Another big thing that goes on here is that he talks about how the mayor didn't really know about the fact that the individuals who were arrested were booked, quote-unquote booked, by Danbury police until like about a year ago. Well, this deposition was done in 2010. He said a year prior, so he said about a year ago. That means he knew about this in 2009, which is quite odd because my recollection is when I did an article with the attorney representing the 11 immigrants in the deportation case, which is different from the civil case, they found out there through an FOI request that they finally obtained information that showed that Danbury Police, it's a booking report that shows Danbury Police were on the booking report. So we knew about some of the stuff that the mayor is talking about in his deposition back in 2007.
And yet the News Times did not cover it.
The News Times didn't even talk about that. And there's a lot of stuff going on in this case that's not being covered. The most importantly is just the fact that the mayor stated right after the raid that Danbury had nothing to do with this raid, and now we know that alone is not true, on top of a lot of other stuff.
Can we just highlight what you said and clarify it for some of our viewers? What you're saying is that at some point, Mayor Boughton said that City Hall and the Danbury Police Department were answering, doing what they needed to do to collaborate with ICE because it was ICE's initiative. And in reality, now we find out from ICE and the police and other people that have been deposed that actually our Danbury's mayor was heavily pressuring ICE to come to the city.
Yes, he was pressuring ICE to come to the city for a long period of time. Okay. And again, when the mayor first made these comments, he made it seem like Danbury knew nothing about this raid, and then later on, after we find out that that the van that was used to pick up these agents was driven by a Danbury undercover police officer. If you're doing a raid on day laborers at 6 o'clock in the morning and you're using a van and the Danbury police officer is driving the van, there has to be some type of planning prior. You just don't come into town, let's say at 5 o'clock in the morning, and say, hey, can I use one of your cars? And you can go down there and pick up some. Police actions don't work like that. I've never seen it happen like that.
It doesn't seem logical.
No. It doesn't seem logical. So it just reinforces in terms of the News Times, in terms of the media covering this stuff, that when you have these questions that lay people can ask, and when you have these questions that myself can ask as somebody who's covering and videotaping this, I think it's incumbent upon reporters who should have alarm bells going off in their head to do a better job of reporting and ask more serious questions about these matters, because in the end this can be a really serious matter for the city of Danbury. Even more troubling than the situation that happened with James Dyer years prior, and what happened with those.
Because it brings up civil rights issues.
Civil rights, we're talking about like lawsuits. We've been to a number of lawsuits. We have the Danbury 11 case. We have a situation in which Lynn Taberzac, who was the Democratic Town Committee chairwoman, came on the show a while back and addressed, which was the firefighter lawsuit.
That was last week,
which was settled by the city of Danbury. Aldell, the mayor, said he wanted to defend this thing vigorously, and the city we did nothing wrong whatsoever. And then we find out that the city settled for $450,000 on top of close to about another $200,000 in legal fees that was not talked about in the News Times articles. And there's a lot of strange stuff that happened in that case that we still don't really know about, because all the city was quoted as saying is that we made some administrative errors.
Errors?
And when Dirk Parafort, who again is the staff writer who does most of the political stuff around here, asked Mayor Boughton for a comment, he couldn't get Mayor Boughton for a comment. Yet 2 days later he gets him on a comment on another story. But here again, this was a serious accusation that was brought up during the last campaign that Gary Goncalves brought up towards Mayor Boughton and said, look, this is a serious problem that's going on here because we're talking about nepotism, and I don't want to get into the real details of the case. You can easily go to my website and you read all the particulars. You can read about how certain people are connected with certain city officials.
Oh, and that's hatcityblog.blogspot.com, or just Google Hat City Blog, you'll get it.
So to make a long story short, that was a very serious matter that somehow just got settled. And we still have plenty of answers. We have plenty of questions that have not been answered by city officials. And again, this is a serious matter where reporters should be, their alarm bells should be going off, and they should be doing their due diligence, getting the answers to these questions from these elected officials. But again, we just gloss over these things, and because we keep glossing over these things, the public's not informed. And when you have a low-informed public, you have a low-informed voter, and that's very dangerous.
And may we also say that, I mean, it seems to me that what you're saying is not only the danger is being misinformed, but really being misled if you're getting only a positive picture or only what, you know, little glimpses of what the mayor's office might want you to see, and you're not doing investigative, you're actually deliberately being misled. And
Right.
and so this could be, bringing it back to the immigration issue, because that is, you know, my favorite issue. It could be actually very misleading to the immigrant community statewide, as he's running for a statewide office, if they're not getting a full picture of his real relations with the immigrant community here in Danbury.
Right, and when you have a situation where, and this is just my opinion, and an opinion of many, when you have a situation where you have a mayor that's so powerful that there is an era of bullying people and bullying people who are in opposition to you, to either shut them down, shut them up, strip their funding for outrageous, bizarre reasons,
Or threaten to.
or threaten to, or things of that nature. It creates a climate of fear so much that your advocate groups that came out in 2005 and did the immigrant marches on Main Street, in 2006 and did the marches on Main Street, are too afraid now to come out and do anything because of retaliation. And not only do they fear retaliation, which they should fear retaliation because they know that nobody's going to report on it. It'll go on deaf ears, and this stuff just goes on the hush.
Right.
The Hispanic Center is a great example of some crazy stuff that went down, and suddenly they were just defunded because, in my opinion, they put out an ad and they spoke out against the ICE Access Program, and a bunch of people who I consider a bunch of bullies didn't like the fact that a group was out there speaking against them, so they silenced them. And that creates a climate of fear throughout the entire immigrant community.
Now, is it possible, and I mean, obviously I'm not asking you to say for certain what is happening, but in this climate, if that is the climate that exists, and I'm not saying for sure that it does, but if it does exist, is it all possible that a person in such a place of power would actually utilize the very people that they're victimizing to speak out on his behalf in a positive way? Like, you know what I mean?
Well, you know, there's a number of scenarios that can go down, and you know, you can, again, it's the whole bully mentality. You can just get away with whatever you want because you've been getting away with whatever you want. So yeah, I mean, he can go out to one group and say, hey, look, you know, make me the head of your festival, and you know, and wink, wink. You better, you know, or else. And they're like, hey, maybe we should do this. We can't do it. What happens if we don't do it? But that's all hypothetical, and those things could happen. But again, this all comes back to the people who are supposed to be the overseers of local government of stuff that's happening in the area, which are your journalists.
Right.
I mean, that's basically their job. They're supposed to inform us, the taxpayers, about what's happening in our community, because we can't get around to all these events. But that's your job, to go around to all these events and report on what's happening so we can be better informed, so we can make a wise decision about our elected officials come Election Day.
Now, is it possible that they are being pressured to do less reporting, or do you think it's more likely that they're just skating by because of budget cuts, or you know, whatever it is? Do you think it's more?
You know, it can be a whole number of factors, and to be honest with you, I just don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Some people can say that, hey, look, you know, Wayne Shepherd was the person down there running the News Times. Now he's the mayor's chief of staff. You know, or somebody can say, hey, Dirk Parafort, you know, maybe he's in bed with Boughton, and they're just two buddies.
Whoa, let's not.
Well,
let's not be quite so literal
I
about
didn't mean
these
it like that, but I'm just saying they can be friends, you know.
Right.
Well, look, I can tell you this: that there was a time not long ago there were reporters that were actually reporting on what's happening down there.
Yeah.
It was, and they did a good job, and now they're all gone.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
the reporters we have right now, all due respect to Dirk and his writing, but I just don't think it's very good. And I don't think he's doing a very good job informing the public, especially when you have an article that's done in New Haven that's 4 times as big as your article.
Yep.
That gets more information about happening in Danbury than your article, but you're based in Danbury, and you had the same deposition.
Well, with deference to Dirk, it's very possible that Dirk's being told how to write an article by his editor.
Again, like I said, there's a whole range of possibilities, but the bottom line is the public is not being properly informed, in my opinion, about what's happening here at City Hall. Because again, I have a blog. I go around and I cover these meetings. Not only do I cover this stuff, and again, it's a blog. It's an opinionated blog.
Sure.
You know, I could do hard news, but I don't do hard news because it just Danbury drives me nuts sometimes. You know, and I can't just do it on hard news because it's just too crazy. But whenever I make my opinion, I always, and I really want to reinforce this to people, that
very important point to know. Go ahead.
I always support everything that I say with either the actual video footage from the meeting, sometimes in its entirety, or documentation to back up what I'm saying. You know, and that's important in my opinion because I always want to give people as much information as possible so they can form their own opinion. For instance, the Danbury 11 deposition. Wouldn't it have been very nice for the News Times just to release the deposition, including Mike McLaughlin's deposition?
On their website?
On their website. So we can read what
people want to read in the entire thing.
So we don't have to keep listening to the mayor's, so we can judge the mayor's opinion in the past, his mayor's statements in the past, based upon what he said under oath. And the exact same thing with Mike McLaughlin, because he's right there with him. But we don't have that. And you have to wonder what's going on when, again, somebody in New Haven can write an article in more detail by the factor of 4 than what we're getting in the News Times. You know,
one thing that is interesting to me too is that when I have seen recent interviews with Boughton or like sound bites in his interviews, he will directly conflict with something that the News Times reported on, say, 2 years ago. I will bring up like the protests regarding the 287G. You know, the newspaper, the News Times was there reporting, and originally they had shots and they said exactly how many people were there, which was in the thousands, you know, easy. And yet, in recent articles where Boughton has questioned, it all of a sudden became a few hundred people, and the News Times did not stop him at that moment and say, it's interesting that he said that because original numbers said in the thousands. So,
and as you recall, I went to the meeting. I went to all the events. I went I went to the ICE access protest that was happening outside the city hall.
We're going to have to cut her off there.
Oh, okay.
We've come to the end of our show.
Okay.
One more quick point, and then we'll sign off.
Well, again, it's just, I think it's incumbent upon everybody to do your due diligence, to look beyond what you're reading in the News Times, find other avenues of information. There will be new forms of journalism in Danbury and in Bethel very soon, so hang in there. The Danbury patch, the Bethel patch will be here to save the day. And just really question what you read here in the News Times, because it is a problem. And if you don't have the information, you can't make an objective or smart vote come election day.
Well put, objective thinking rather than, we sometimes think of it as being critical thinking, but objective thinking is what we're looking for.
Yes.
Look, read, question.
Investigate
on your own. Think. Think. Thank you.